So we're going to do a lot of reading from the PowerPoint. And the reason I'm doing this is because, we learn by not just hearing. I come up here and I speak, and because I've studied the information, it's easy for me. But sometimes it might be a little bit difficult to grasp as I'm speaking. But the hope is that as you see this stuff and you read it for yourself, a little bit more you would understand. And the second reason is, as we go through this, I want to give you the opportunity and the power to stop me, and if something don't make no sense, say, can you go that over again? Because now you're going to be reading it with me, right? 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 Okay. I'm just checking to see if anybody's still awake. Because if we get halfway through and everybody asleep, we're going to stop. I'm just... I know. I got to get everybody awake. Okay, so last week I said that this week, because of where we are, you're right. Right now we're in the season of Counting the Omer. So I said I'm going to give a more in-depth teaching on that, and a more in-depth teaching on the whole season so that it makes sense to you. So when somebody's talking about Counting the Omer, somebody's talking about Wave Sheaf, somebody's talking about first fruits, somebody's talking about Pesach, somebody's talking about all this stuff, Feast of Weeks. Well, all this stuff, how'd we get all that? Well, hopefully today we're going to put it all together and see how it all makes sense. So we're going to read, and I'm going to try this. Hold on. I'm going to try this thing to see how it works. Benjamin, you're going to have to help me if I'm not doing this right. There goes old people again. Am I supposed to hit? Which one again? Okay. All right. So look at that. Counting the Omer. Did you notice what they're counting with? That's an abacus. Y'all know that? Okay, for some of the young people, they ain't got a clue what I just said. That's one of them old, okay, this might be Jewish, but the Chinese is the one that started that whole thing. Oh yeah, they did. Anyway, so they're counting the Omer, just for there we go. There we go. I don't know if you guys can see it. All right. So let's get started. An omer is an ancient Hebrew unit of dry volume. Omer meaning that the actual word. And it's equivalent to about 2.2 to 3 liters of volume. It signifies a sheaf of barley offered in the temple during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Here we go. We start talking about Feast of Unleavened Bread, and we're talking about a sheaf of barley offered in the temple. Sepheret HaOmer, that means counting the Omer, tracks the 7 weeks between the Feast of First Fruits. See, here we go again, another phrase, Feast of First Fruits, during Passover to Shavuot. Now, if you look on your little diagram, you'll see that. You'll see they have, on the bottom, you'll see that the little arrow that goes across from Feast of First Fruits to Shavuot. All right. And it says in Leviticus 23, 15, 16, it says, and you shall count unto you from the morrow of the Shabbat. Now, I underline that phrase because you're going to see that phrase over and over and over again. And when we come to the end of the presentation, we're going to have to define that phrase. For now, it just says, count on the day after the Shabbat. But then we see also that it also gives a little bit more explanation. It says, from the day that you brought the wave sheaf offering. So, count from the day after the Shabbat. So we got to figure out what's Shabbat. Is it the Shabbat like we are today, weekly Shabbat, or is it the holy day Shabbat of the first day of unleavened bread? So let's just I'm just giving you that for now. And so then it gives this other criteria. It says that that day, whatever that Shabbat that you count, must be also on the day that you brought the Wave Sheaf offering. 7 Shabbats must be completed. Even unto the morrow after the 7 Shabbats shall you number 50 days. And the festival of Shavuot, so if you hear festival of Shavuot, you hear festival of weeks, same thing. Shavuot means weeks. You're counting 7 weeks. It says you should observe on the 50th day after the 7th Shabbat. Okay. Let me let you know up front. If you need the copy of this, I'm sending it to you. So don't, if anybody needs a copy. Okay. So remember, we talk about the wave sheaf here on the first page, right? So we got to figure out, well, what's this wave sheaf? Well, next, I need a helper. Is that wave sheaf? So the wave sheaf is a bundle of grain stalk laid lengthwise and tied together after reaping. A wave sheaf offering is this biblical ritual that we see in Leviticus 23, verse 10 to 14. And it occurs during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, again, on the day after the Shabbat. See that statement comes back again? On the day after the Shabbat. But the offering consists of a sheaf of barley representing the first harvest. So let me stop there for a minute. In the springtime, we go back to Exodus chapter 12, where God set aside and he says, this month of Nissan, shall be the first month to you. That's Exodus 12. Now, if you see somewhere the month of Aviv, or Aviv, I can't pronounce it real well, that's the same month. That's just the Nissan is the translation that the Hebrew folks used after they came out of Babylon. Aviv was the old Hebrew word. That's my understanding. Okay, so they were supposed to. So that springtime is the barley harvest. Spring barley. And let me say also what you want to keep in mind. Spring is the first harvest. It's not the major harvest. The barley harvest is the small harvest. Happens in the springtime. So this sheaf, it says, the priest shall wave the sheaf before God as a symbol of gratitude and dedication. And this act signifies the beginning of the harvest season and God's provision. And it's a precursor to Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks. So in agricultural time, we're talking about an agricultural society, right? So what they would do, the barley harvest comes up, they're not supposed to eat any of it, of the new barley, until they take a sickle and they cut some of that barley, tie it up in a bundle, take it to the priest, and the priest will wave it before God in all different directions, basically saying that God is their complete provider. Although they're waving this one little sickle of barley before the Lord as the first of the first fruits, and we're going to get to that. Should I keep going? All right. Oh, so now let me show you. I have to put this in there. See there? That's the priest. He waving the little barley thing. I couldn't find any better. Maybe, I don't know. This looks so like for a kid. But anyway, so he's waving this barley harvest. All right, before the Lord. Okay, and then I mentioned on the first page about this wave sheaf. So what is the wave sheaf? So if we go to Leviticus 23, verse 10 to 14, we read this. It says, "Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when you come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof," that's the barley harvest. We're going to get to the wheat harvest later on. That's the barley harvest. "You shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest." So again, we're bringing a sheaf of the first fruits. "And he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted for you." And here we go with that phrase again, "on the day after the Shabbat." The priest shall wave it on the day after the Shabbat. "And you shall offer on that day, when you wave the sheaf, a he lamb without blemish of the first year for a burnt offering unto the Lord." And there's more you could read in there, but let me just go to the end. "And you shall eat," so here is the prohibition. "You shall eat neither bread, nor parched corn, nor green air, until the selfsame day that you brought an offering unto the Lord your God." We're talking about the wave sheaf offering. That little phrase that says, "nor green air," that qualifies, that tells you that you weren't supposed to eat of that barley, that green barley, before you do the wave sheaf before the Lord. So the Israelites was not supposed to eat of any of this new. Remember that, again, this is springtime. This is the first crop coming up. This is like Ben, planting his garden. He got his first tomatoes or something. And they're supposed to take that wave sheaf, wave it before the Lord on the day after the Shabbat, that same phrase, before they can partake. And now harvest, which would be considered the first harvest, they would now be able to eat that in their dwelling. And they can make pancakes or whatever they make with barley. I mean, maybe it's not pancakes, What kind of cakes? Barley cakes. He's right. They make barley cakes or barley porridge. I'm sure there was all kind of ingenious ways to make with this barley, because again, it's the first of the first fruits. It's the first fruits. And then God says that this statute shall be for you throughout your generation and all your dwellings. So if I were to recap, just so we don't get too far and lose, if you go back, and you know what, Linda, I don't have one of them pages, I think, but I know the page well enough, I think. I'll give it back to you in a second. So if you go back to this page right here, you would see that the preparation for Passover, that's from, of course, we know the lamb had to be brought in 10 days before. You see on the 14th, Erev Pesach, 14th that evening, and you notice where the Passover Seder is. Passover Seder is basically after the 14th. I know I said that last week, and some folks was like, give me that eye. And I know, sometimes we forget. And then you see where first fruits is. Now, in this example, it shows that the Feast of First Fruits is on the 16th. In this example. Which is fine. We're going to get to there to explain how they get the 15th. And then if you notice, you have that 49 days from the Feast of First Fruits to Shavuot. But don't forget, look up top of that diagram. We have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Feast of Unleavened Bread starts on the 15th and goes all the way to the evening of the 21st, which is what we did on Wednesday. We broke that Feast of Unleavened Bread. And that's a part of this whole season. Some people call it season of Pesach. This diagram called the season of liberation. So I want to show you that there's a bunch of little feasts or little celebrations in between the whole counting of the Omer that sometimes we might forget. Or we might not know where to place them. Or we might not know what's the importance. Or why do I do this? Right? Hopefully, you understand that we as New Covenant believers are doing it in solidarity with what we saw happen to the children of Israel. And there's a lot of good reminders for us when we're talking about unleavened bread. When we're talking about getting leaven out of your house. Last week I made a joke, but it's not. It's a true story. I told you guys last week, after I did my little unleavened thingy, 2 days later I go on the crisper or the refrigerator and there's a bagel stuck in the corner somewhere. And I laugh. I laugh because I remind myself how I don't know if that's the word I can say right now. I remind myself how crazy I was. Back when I first learned about the Moedims, I got married 27, I was probably 30 years old, full of myself, right? So, and we didn't know anybody. Because back then, when I first started going to the World Church of God, only if you were a member, you could do this stuff. So at that time, I wasn't a member. So I'm trying to figure what to do. And of course, I'm reading the scriptures. And I'm reading about, getting the leaven out of your house. And I was crazy trying to do it. And so it's a reminder that you can't get all leaven out of your house. And you can't get the leaven out of yourself. See, that's what the reminder is. So I was chuckling, laughing. Only God can get all the leaven out of you. You can try all you want. Like I tried. The bagel's still in there. And I'm sure if I really went back like I did in my crazy day with the vacuum cleaner and the little thing in there, I was trying to go into all these crevices, there's still some leaven somewhere. I know I diverted a little bit. But it's important that we look and understand that although we're going through this stuff and understand, we can't do some of this stuff. Because the temple in here, you can't do feast of, in the way that they did it. You can't bring a wave sheaf. Where is your barley? You ain't got none. You can go to Giants and buy some barley. We're being kind of funny. But the point is we're doing this to remind ourselves of all what Yeshua already done for us. That's what we're doing. But as we go through it, it's such a beautiful exercise. But if you miss that the exercise is about you being holy, and the exercise is about what Yeshua already done for you, and if you're doing it but trying to be holy and saying, well, if I did this, I'm going to be holy. No, you're wrong. Because we're going to see, I've always say, we always have to look at the Moedim in a new covenant reality. We just have to. New covenant reality means that Yeshua is already here. He died. When they were doing this, they were looking forward to Yeshua. They were talking about the prophet that's supposed to come, like the prophet of Moses. Well, he been here 2,000 years ago. All right. Let me pull myself back now. So let's go to the next. All right. So let's talk a little bit about, is that the right one? Maybe I got the pages wrong. We just did the Wave Sheaf, right? Here we go. All right, and we talk about Feast of First Fruits, so let's read about that. The Feast of the First Fruit was a festival commanded by the Lord that took place, again, within the Passover celebration period. If you want to say within the spring Moedim, that's wonderful. The Feast of First Fruits, again, serve as a reminder to the Israelites of God's provision. As its name suggests, the Feast of First Fruits require the Israelites to bring a sheaf of the first grain. We talked about that earlier on. They harvest each year to the priests. And the priest would then take the sheaf and wave it before the Lord on the day after the Shabbat. And it says on that same day, the Israelites were to sacrifice a year-old lamb without defect as a burnt offering. I think we already talked about this. Anyway, they were not allowed to eat of any of the crops until the first portion was brought before the priests. The first fruits belong to God. And the people of Israel acknowledge God as the source of their crops and provision overall. We see that in Leviticus 23:14. And then 7 weeks after the first fruits, the Israelites will celebrate the Feast of Weeks, which was one of the 3 Moedims that require all Jewish males to travel to Jerusalem. So again, Feast of First Fruits is like, it's that one-day thing that you did, that the children of Israel did, to acknowledge to God of the provision that he has given them. And then they look forward to Shavuot, which we'll see represents the greater harvest. And we see that, we're looking forward to that also. Make sure I got my time right. Okay. So now let's go back a little bit of historical background. And again, I'm just giving you little tidbits of what I think is important. It doesn't mean this is the whole background. This is, when I'm looking at it, I'm trying to just get the things that I believe, will help us to understand. So in the days of the temple, this Feast of First Fruits was a very elaborate ceremony of bringing the Wave Sheaf offering as a tithe to God. The priests would meet the pilgrims at the edge of the city, so they would, everybody's coming up with their little wave sheaf, like we saw, and they're coming up with it. The priests will meet them at the edge of the city. And then the priests, let me make sure I get this right. And then he would escort them to the Temple Mount, leading with praise and worship and dance. So this was an excited time because, the people want to give God the first fruits because they recognize that God's the one that's blessing them with all their belongings that they have. So that's the same thing that we should have. We should have the same attitude, right? That God says that the cattle on 1,000 hills belong to him. He says the gold and the earth belong to him. Everything belongs to him. You belong to God. Therefore, your job belongs to God. Therefore, your money belongs to God. Therefore, everything you own belongs to God. And he says he loves a cheerful giver. Now, anybody got a question about that? Take it up with God. Because that's what he says. But he also, I like how God does. He says, prove me this day. Prove me. God likes a challenge. And it's amazing how God sometimes, we have an issue going on in our lives and we burn into midnight oil and we praying and nothing happening. Nothing happening. But you know why nothing happening? And I'm being funny here now. This ain't all Bible. This isn't all Bible. Because I believe God, like the challenge is not big enough yet. He got to, because it's like, God needs to wait till it gets to, that the mountain get bigger. Okay, that's supposed to be like a joke. The point is, though, is that God says to prove him. Prove him. When it comes to giving, to prove God, he says he loves a cheerful giver. So I can see, they're having a wonderful, like a party, going up to celebrate the Feast of First Fruits, to celebrate the Wave Sheaf. Why? Because they're expecting the harvest and that God is going to give them. So that's the historical background. Okay, so how about New Covenant observance? Because this is where we are. This is where, I didn't see, is that correct now? There we go. I got to click it, but I'm getting help from the back there, so that's just wonderful. I should just say click it when I'm ready, because I get just put this thing away maybe. Okay. New covenant reality or new covenant observance. So Ahavat Omer is mentioned several times in the New Covenant scriptures. 1 Corinthians 15, 20 to 23 says, "But now, Yeshua has risen from the dead and become the first fruits of them who sleep." So who's our first fruits right now? Yeshua. You ain't got no sickle. I ain't see you bring any first fruits. Linda, where's yours? You got your first fruits coming up? Because you already got Yeshua first. Amen. So it says Yeshua is our first fruits. Because if he wasn't risen from the dead, we ain't got no hope. You got no hope. So I often wonder, we talk about Yeshua being the first of the first fruits. Remember when Yeshua was resurrected? This might be a little thing that you might forget. There's a bunch of folks got resurrected at that same time. Believers. They had first fruits. And I think that God showed us Yeshua being the first of the first fruits, and then just to let us know that we physical beings, we human beings in him will be resurrected, he gave us an example. He brought some of them out. They were resurrected. So you got no excuse to say, well, wait a minute now. Yeah. Yeshua was resurrected, but what about us? We ain't really know if we're going to be resurrected. He demonstrated it. And that we have that hope that we're going to be resurrected. Then it says, let's go back, it says, for since by man came death, then also, by man also came the resurrection of the dead. But every man in his own order. Yeshua the first fruits. Afterwards, they that are Yeshua at his coming. That's us. We see here Paul makes the reference to the Sefer Omer. Yeshua being the first to be raised from the dead is the first of the first fruits. And then we will follow. So when we're celebrating Sefer Omer, and when we're celebrating first fruits, we need to have that mentality. Man, I can't wait. Yeshua demonstrated. He's been resurrected. He's the first fruits. And we're going to be following Yeshua. And again, we have physical examples of people that was resurrected when Yeshua came out of the grave. Don't forget that. Okay, so that's new covenant reality. How about prophetic fulfillment? Let's look at that. Oh, here we go. Okay, I guess I'm going to leave that clicker right there. So the observance of the Feast of First Fruits points to the resurrection of Yeshua the Messiah And in an agricultural harvest festival, where the barley sheaf is weighed before the Lord, and I said, if you think about it, the grain that comes from the earth, the grain that comes from the earth is now lifted up on high for all to see. Okay, let me explain what I mean by that. Remember, I showed the little picture of the guy with the little wave sheaf, right? So the grain had to be planted in the ground, right? The grain had to die, right? And then it sprout the barley. And that barley that sprouted now is cut and waved on high, and waved on high, so that we see that just like how the wave sheaf was lifted up on high, that Yeshua lifted up on high. When he was resurrected, it's the same. We have to have that same mentality of understanding. And we see Yeshua spoke of his resurrection in a similar fashion. In John chapter 12, verse 23 to 24 and verse 32. And Yeshua answered and them saying, the hour is come that the Son of Man must be or should be glorified. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall in the ground and die, it abides alone. But if it dies, it brings forth much fruit. And I, Yeshua was talking, if I be lifted up like the first fruits, like the wave sheaf, I want you to get that. So I'm trying to make sure that you understand when you're doing these things, you're doing it with that understanding. The understanding of Yeshua dying. The understanding of Yeshua will lift it up like a wave sheaf. He said he will draw all men to himself. I might have mentioned this before sometimes. When I was, many of you knew where I grew up in an agricultural society. A lot of the stuff I read in the scriptures, I've seen it. Seen it in terms of how you grow crops back in those old days and using a sickle and all this kind of stuff. So we had lots of gardens. In where you grew up, where I grew up, there's no winter, there's no time to plant and time to reap. It's every time. You plant when you feel like it. You reap when you feel like it. What I mean, I don't mean to be funny, but when you live on the equator, it's always sunshine. You can plant anytime. I used to be very impatient when I would plant whatever. I'm planting some beans, right? And I go and I put the little bean thingy in the ground, put my little cow manure on top of it. By the time day 3, I want to see what's happening. No, I was like this. I would go back and dig it up back a little slowly. I'm being very careful. And sometimes I damage the plant because sometimes it's already up. It's coming up. But I used to be real fascinated, though, because I would time this real good sometimes where I'm literally just seeing the little itty-bitty little bud coming out the bottom. You would think I would leave it now, right? I got to go back next day to see how far it goes. But it always fascinates me about a seed having to die. You know what it looks like? Okay, so the seed itself swells because it's taking all this moisture. And it don't look good. It starts to get discoloration. And then it literally splits. And the root comes from the middle. It comes down. Anyway, that's too much information. But Yeshua, again, had to die. He's the first fruits. So when we're doing this, we need to understand that. And where was I again? Got to get myself back here because I get. Okay, prophetic fulfillment. So we know that one day that we will be resurrected. And we will be counted in that harvest. Okay, there we go. There we go. Counting the Omer blessing. All right. So, how we do this? How do we do the counting? So, here is how you do it. So, each night for the 50-day period, this blessing is recited, followed by the specific day and week of the count. The blessing goes like this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvota v'tzivano al sefer ha-omer. That's the Hebrew. And that says, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us with mitzvot and commands us concerning the counting of the Omer. So every night, as you're counting, this is what you're supposed to say. And then you're supposed to say whatever that day and that week is. So if it's the 23rd day, so you'll say, my example, today is the 23rd day of the Omer, which is 3 weeks and 2 days of the Omer. Okay. If it's day 1, what are you going to say? Basically, today's day 1, because you ain't got weeks yet. You know? If it's day 3, today is day 3. You ain't got no weeks yet. If it's day 8, you will say, today is day 8, week 1, 8th day. And then you read the scripture of the day, which I'll give to you in a little, you'll see that in a minute. But I just want to give you this is the practical way now. This is how you do it. Every night, you say the blessing, and you repeat the time of where you are in the Omer, and then you read, there's a verse of the day for each day. Hold your horses. We're going to get to the verse of the day. It's in here somewhere. Okay. Oh boy, this page. I got it here. Okay. Biblical criteria for counting the Omer. Now, I specifically says biblical criteria. Okay. This is what it says in the scriptures. You know how we are, right? We got biblical criteria, and then we got what we want to do. Okay. So you can find this in the scripture just like I did. I just put it together here for you. Here is the biblical criteria. There's 4 criteria for counting the Omer. And I got the verse here for you. You go to Leviticus 23, verse 11. It says, the priest shall wave the wave sheaf of the firstfruits to be accepted to the Lord on the day after the Shabbat. That same phrase come again. That's criteria number 1. Criteria number 2. You shall eat neither bread, nor parched grain, nor fresh grain, until the day you brought the wave sheaf offering to the Lord. That's criteria number 2. That's verse 14. Verse 15. And you shall count for yourself from the day after the Shabbat. Here it comes again. And from the, see it says now, from the day after the Shabbat, and. That means the 2 has to line up. And from the day you brought the wave sheaf offering, 7 Shabbats shall be completed. You would think that looks very simple. Okay. One last one. Criteria number 4. It says, you shall count 50 days after the 7th Shabbat. That's what it says in the scriptures. Why is it so elaborate? Why couldn't God just say, pick a date? No, he gave this elaborate way of how you know when to start counting. All right. So keep that in mind. So, interesting fact. Interesting fact. You will find that Shavuot is the only major moed for which a calendar date is not specified in the Torah. Not specified. Rather, the date is determined by the date that you start counting the Omer. Think about it. Pesach. What did God say? 14th day. At evening, it's Pesach. Feast of Unleavened Bread. 15th day. You ain't got to think about it. 15th day of the month, days of unleavened bread. 7 days to the 21st day. 14th day. When it comes to Shavuot or Pentecost, then we have this elaborate way of when we got to count. Just keep that in mind. Feast of Trumpets. First day of the 7th month. Right there. Day of Atonement. 10th day of the 7th month. Feast of Tabernacles. 15th day of the 7th month. I just put that in there for information's sake, but it's very important. So now we're going to get to, I'm about to wrap this up in a minute. Okay, methods of counting the Omer. And right there, look at that first statement. There is disagreement. Disagreement whether the Shabbat referenced in Leviticus 23 is the weekly Shabbat, like Shabbat today, or the first day of unleavened bread Shabbat. This is where the whole issue comes up. So, without going into detail, we can go into a lot of detail. Rabbinic Orthodox interpret the Leviticus 23:15. They interpret it to be the second night of Pesach or Nissan 16. So they've established that the day that you start counting the Omer is the 16th. Lots of reasons for that. If you do study, you'll find that some of the reasons is because they just didn't want to take the additional time to figure out the real day. Now, I'm not joking. And they decided, well, 16 sounds like a good day for uniformity and for ease and for the whole community. We're going to make the 16th day. Now, they have some reasons, and I guess I can't go into all right now. I'm just saying so that we understand that this right now, that's how they count the Omer, from the 16th. However, we find that there's another set of Jews called the Karaite Jews, and they count the Omer starting from the Sunday, the day after the weekly Shabbat. And Shavuot will always fall on the Sunday, which is the day after the weekly Shabbat. It will start on a Sunday, it will end on the Sunday. But it will never be the same date every year. It would not be the 16th. Because the Shabbat, if you have Pesach on a Monday, you still got to wait till Shabbat comes on Saturday. You got Pesach on Wednesday, you still got to wait till Shabbat comes on that Saturday. So those days of counting will always change. So here's my question. My question is, I just showed you, right? That God gave specific days for all the other modim. All the other modim. Specific day. This is the day. This is the day. And he just forgot to say that counting the Omer was on the 16th. He just totally forgot to say that. Couldn't he have just said the 16th? We would have all been didn't got any problem. Okay. Just to give you a little bit real quick, because, somebody might say, well, one of the things that the rabbinic Jews say is that when it says day after the Shabbat, they say that word Shabbat in Leviticus 23:15 could be or is translated weeks. So they say, well, it's really not Shabbat. It's really weeks. And then they go to, I think it's Numbers chapter 10, verse 5, where it speaks about when Joshua was in charge of the children of Israel. In Numbers chapter 10, verse 5. Let me see if I can find it. Again, I want to say this. My explanation is not to, I don't fight over when you count the Omer. I don't. Because it's not something that is salvation related. Meaning, you want to count on the 16th? You want to count from the first day of after the Shabbat? Knock yourself out. In fact, we see that God says that it's kind of interesting in the New Covenant scriptures where God talks about every man can uphold any day you want to, in a sense. He says, just be fully committed and understand what you're doing. Right? So, in a sense, I know that the question would probably be, and I'm not sure if I have it in here, but the question would be, well, when does Ahavat count? Okay, I'll answer that question right now. So, Ahavat, in solidarity with the larger Jewish community, in solidarity with the way Tikkun counts the Omer, we actually use the rabbinic method, so the 16th, as the day that we count. Now, again, let me tell you something about the Karaites, because there's a lot of little bit nuggets about the Karaites that I kind of agree with. So the Karaites was a sect of Jews that did not believe in the oral Torah, the Talmud, and all the other stuff. Right? They just didn't. Rabbinic Jews, they believe in all that oral stuff. The Karaites were like, no, we don't, that oral stuff, that ain't scriptural. That ain't God. Now, I'm not trying to get into a fight with anybody. Okay? I kind of like them Karaites a little bit. I'm just going to be, you know what I'm saying? I might, if the Karaites is over here, I'm kind of leaning. You know what I'm saying? Got a little twist there, Linda, to the Karaite side. But let me give you a story, because this is really, y'all not going to believe this. I told you that I started learning about Holy Feast Days back in 1986, 40 years ago. Do you know I've been dealing with this 40 years ago, this same issue? When I started going to Warwick Church of God, so I met a bunch of guys my age. You normally, you're going to gravitate to the people that are your age. So there's a bunch of us that are young, just got the first kid. We all hanging out. We're a little group. And we try to study this thing. It's way back then. And we could not understand, okay, well, what day are you supposed to count? I look back now and I laugh. Here's what we did. I kid you not. This is going to sound so ridiculous, but we did. We went and found the local rabbi because we figured he's probably going to know. We go and met with the local rabbi, and we left there more confused. I'm just going to be honest. But this is an issue that's been going on forever. I'm just letting you know. So don't get, if it's one thing, okay, so I got to finish up. So let me give you real quick. Okay, I don't know if you can see that. Oh boy, that might be hard. Okay, you probably can't see it. So I made up 2 spreadsheets. So I make these spreadsheets every year. Right. And I make 2. I make one for counting from the 16th. That's this one. So if we're doing the one counting from the 16th, where would we be today? We would be day 10. We'd be the 10th day of counting the Omer. Because we would start, Passover is on Wednesday, right? First day of unleavened bread is on Thursday. So we would start on that April the 2nd as being the first day. And you would end up having Shavuot on May 21st, which is a Thursday. Again, if you want a copy, I'll get you a copy so you can see it for yourself. Now, if you count on the way the Karaites count, will be the next diagram. Yes. Then you would be in day 7 of counting the Omer. All right, so let's so first of all, I hope that this is a little helpful. Something that you can kind of go back and look at. Again, I try to do it in this format so that you can see it, read it, see the diagrams. But if we miss, all that we just talked about, let's not miss the most important thing. The most important thing is that it's just a reminder. As we're doing this, it's a reminder of what Yeshua has done for us. It's a reminder of what we're looking forward to. Because, we're going to be resurrected one day. And then look at the whole spring festival as one big festival with all these little things that should remind us of what Yeshua done for us, should remind us what we're looking forward to, should remind us how we need to be holy before God. As we're counting the Omer, and if you notice in that diagram right there, it gives you each day what the reading is. So again, if for kicks and giggles, if you just want to practice it, so when you go home, on the top of the page, I have the blessing. So you read the blessing, and then you go down, find that day, and it'll be a corresponding verse. Here's what I'm going to tell you. It's very interesting. If you do it, you're going to see a pattern. If you do it, these verses, these are some of the things that amazes me of how, I don't know who put this together. I'm sure the rabbis put this together, all the verse and all the kind of stuff. They did a wonderful job. That's all So try it, but make sure you're doing it with the right attitude, that this is stuff to remind us, because every feast day, every time, every year we got to do this every year. Every year is supposed to be more exciting. Every year is supposed to learn something new about it, I feel like I went back in a circle this year. Because I told you all, I had all this planned for this big Passover. It didn't happen. Couldn't do it. I'm back to me and Gail alone. That's it. That was Pesach this year. We were laughing. We were like, this looked like 40 years ago. We went back to the whole wilderness and come back. So don't take these things, as you do them, recognize why you're doing them. Recognize how you do them. Recognize it's a blessing from God to have this stuff to remind us every year of Yeshua and the Passover and the days of unleavened bread and the first fruits and the wave sheaf, and then everything kind of makes sense. So right now, you should be looking forward to Pesach. Right now, we're looking forward, not Pesach, what am I saying? We're looking forward to Shavuot. I know. Shavuot. We're looking forward to Shavuot. And your prayer should be, as you're counting the Omer, Lord, help me to be ready for Shavuot. Because remember, if you look at Acts chapter 2, you know, the Shavuot that when the Holy Spirit was poured out, they were waiting, right? And they didn't know when it was actually going to happen. And so, therefore, when the suddenly happens, here you go. So we have to be prepared for that suddenly. And again, you know, I hope this was helpful. It's not about taking sides. It's about, you know, looking at the scriptures and seeing what it says. And, you know, it's not a salvation issue. And people can disagree about how you count. I mean, like I said, I don't make it an argument in terms of, you know, fighting with someone about it. It's about how we do it. Right? We're supposed to have grace for our brothers, grace for each other, grace for me. So I hope this was a blessing.